I'm going to load data into Snowflake. Now that data could be existing collecting live market data from a native or RT collector, or it could be files on disk, whether in CSV, JSON, XML, etc., or it could be from an existing OneTick database. And in this video, I'll go through an existing OneTick database. So we have the documentation here, but let's see this in action. I have my locator, or I have my source database, which I'm going to be loading data from. My target, which is just a reference to my Snowflake environment. So I'm defining my archive compression method, so how we're going to compress data when sending it to Snowflake. In this case, I'm selecting Z standard. And my Snowflake configuration file. Finally, we have this archive format set to Snowflake rather than native or Parquet. So here we're not really defining a database, we're just defining the connection to Snowflake. Now this configuration file, we can see here, where I'm defining a config file for SQL and a connection. And in my config file, we can see my account details, username and password, and the database I want to write to. So I have my database. Next step will be to create the tables. So here I'm defining my tables inside my Snowflake database and defining the fields. Let's just show tables. And you can see I don't have any tables loaded. Now let's run create Snowflake tables, which is running a script to create the tables. It's connecting to Snowflake, it's running, creating the tables, and now they're there. Now, in my existing session, if I say show tables, I've got my tables loaded, snow quote and snow trade. Next step, I'm going to run an OTQ query loader. Here I'm calling a particular query, which is reading data out of my full demo L1 sample database with my query start time set to the start of the day up to 12 noon. This is run data load 1. Okay, this is reading the data from the database, compressing it, and then it will send it across to the Snowflake environment where it will be loaded into the tables. While that's happening, let's go to my other connection and let's select the count of from quote. That's just 141 rows. There's not much data yet. Let's run the second batch, which we can see from 12 noon to 3 p.m. This time, rather than loading 144 ticks, we'll see how much it loads. Now the rationale of showing this in stages is we can have incremental loads, where throughout the day you could add new data into the Snowflake table. Okay, where we had under 200 records before, this time we'll include the market open, and we should see more records. So we've got 162,000. Let's have a look at the number of quotes now. Rather than 141, now we've got 127,000. Let's try next one. Again, if I go to part 3, we're now loading from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. It's retrieving the data, or running the query, retrieving the data, compressing it, sending it to Snowflake, then loading those records into the Snowflake table, appending them. And then we see hopefully the load completing very soon. Now, how long it takes will depend on how much data we're pushing across the network. While that's happening, I'll just prepare my count. See, that count hasn't changed yet. Okay, now it's loaded 800,000 records. Run again. Now you've got new set, final set of the day, which is loading the data from 6 p.m. until midnight. This time there should be a bit less data. So it's read the data from the queries. It's now it's compressed the data, and now it's pushing it to Snowflake for loading. And we can actually see in here, you can say loading compressed CSV files. When we're sending data to Snowflake, we're sending them as CSVs. We did try sending Parquet, but actually it's significantly faster to pass across CSV than it is to pass across Parquet. Now, if the tables that you're defining, let's try again. Now I've got 1.3 million quotes and 295,000 trades. So if the table schema defined in Snowflake, which is this table schema here, is different to your table that you're loading, we'll load the matching fields. So if there are additional fields, they'll be ignored. If there are fields here that don't have data, they'll end up with default null values. Okay, so now I have my data in Snowflake. Let's say select start. Let's maximize this and just bring back the first 1,000 rows. Here's my rows all for AA. Let's just look at Cisco. Okay, now I have Cisco being returned. So my data is loaded into Snowflake. If I go back, the key things were defining the database for pushing data into Snowflake, the archive compression method, and the archive format, the reference to our Snowflake configuration file, which defined test connection, and then our SQL CFG file. We have our database defined and our account details. We've also downloaded SnowSQL as it states in the documentation. Then we have the SQL for creating the tables. And then we have our loaders, which are loading data from a source and loading them into our Snowflake tables. In this case, our source is an existing database and we're just running a query, but it can equally be any other loader. So JSON loader, ASCII loader, RT loader, native loader. So whether you're loading market data or loading the results of a query, the method is the same.